How's the sound? Everybody hear me in the back okay? Okay? A little louder, huh? How's that, Mary Beth?
That's great.
Wonderful. Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you all for being here on this exciting evening. There's a few new faces in the crowd, so I'm Ryan Rukicki, the director of the Working Men's Institute. And tonight's presentation is part of the Arlene Feiner Memorial Research Grant for Women's Studies, a program which has been made possible by the Ephraimson Family Foundation with additional support from Phyllis Feiner. We are deeply grateful for their continued commitment to encouraging research and scholarship in women's history. I would like to extend sincere thanks to the Grant Selection Committee, Friends of the Working Men's Institute President Jeannie Maudlin, WMI Trustee Christine Cruz, USI Professor Jen Horn, WMI member Linda Warham, Dr. Annette Parks, recently retired from the University of Evansville, and our very own collections manager here at the Working Men's Institute, Melora Adams. Their work ensures that this grant continues to highlight meaningful and impactful scholarship. The program also honors the legacy of Arlene Feiner, who was a passionate advocate for women's rights and women's issues. Arlene believed deeply in the importance of preserving women's stories, elevating their contributions, and supporting research that brings overlooked voices into the light. It's in that spirit that we gather tonight. Tonight's presentation is by Hope McLeod, the 2025 recipient for the Arlene Feiner Grant. Hope is an award-winning journalist, poet, and songwriter. She hails from the North Woods of Washburn, Wisconsin, and she's the author of 2 books, The Place We Began, a poetry collection, and Have I Got a Story for You, which is a compilation of her best newspaper stories. From 2012 to 2018, she worked as a feature writer for the Bayfield County Journal and the Ashland Daily Press, where she published more than 750 articles. Her writing has appeared in many national publications, including Wisconsin Trails, Verse Wisconsin, American Craft Magazine, Neiman Storyboard, and Wisconsin People and Ideas. She is also a musician and recording artist with 2 albums, Time to Dream from 1990 and 1998's Frozen in Time. Several of her songs have been featured in PBS documentaries, and others have been used in museum installations. She is also a descendant of Robert Owen, which brings us to tonight. Her talk, The Parke Sisters, grows out of her lifelong interest in the creative legacy of her female ancestors. The Parke Sisters were classically trained musicians who toured the United States by rail from 1898 to 1906, bringing music to the audiences across the country at a time when very few women performed such. Their story has often been overshadowed by the accomplishments of the male members of the Owen family. But Hope is going to correct that a little bit tonight.
Good girl.
Please join me in welcoming Hope McLeod.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I have to say, Utopia has more events every night of the week, and here you are. You came. Thank you. I wasn't sure anybody would show up. Well, thank you, Ryan. You actually, you took my first paragraph, so I can save a little time here. So you got a little recap of who the Parke Sisters are. I knew one of them, my grandmother, the cellist, quite well. And Cara, who was the pianist, Caroline, was alive when I was alive, and I have letters that she sent to us. She would write us from Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, where they lived at the end of their lives. And these are precious letters because she became an author after it was her second career. And she was a very successful writer with 14 historic fiction that was published with Doubleday. And she was the first American woman to write historic fiction for young adults. So I'm very proud of her. So where did these gals come from? This is about this place because it had such meaning in their lives, and only one of the Parke sisters was actually born here. But these two fellows you're familiar with. On the far left is, Robbie Owen, we call him in the family. And maybe I just need to say a little something for those who may be watching this online, which is Robert Owen was a social reformer, philanthropist, and cotton mill owner. And he was the champion of the working class in Britain. He's very, very well known in Britain for having done things like initiate the 1819 cotton mill law, which was children 10 and under cannot be employed in the factories. So that was a coup, and he wanted to go further with that, but he ran up against a brick wall with Parliament, and he decided ultimately to sell that factory and come here and started Utopian Community. So here we are. And this fellow on the right, he brought here as a Pestalozzi teacher for his experimental community. And Joseph Neef is also a great grandfather, along with Robert Owen of the Parke Sisters. And they were very influential, even though they were past by the time the Parke Sisters were born. And everybody here, did you attend the Pestalozzi? Yes, I wish I could have come. I love that book. I read that. I homeschooled my daughter from 6th grade on, and I used the Pestalozzi method as much as I could. And it was very inspirational. The motto for Pestalozzi is hand, heart, and mind. So it's an integrative, holistic education with lots of outdoor experiences and kinetic learning versus rote at the beginning. Okay, so here, these are where the two ancestral rivers flow together into one because a Neef daughter married an Owen son. So we've got David Dale Owen, my great-grandfather, first United States geologist, among other things. He also had an avid interest in chemistry. I don't know if everybody knows that, but I'll tell you a little story about that later. Caroline Neef, his wife, was raised by two Pestalozzi teachers, her father and her mother. And so she got a heavy dose, and she lived with the Parke sisters all through their childhood and had a huge influence on their lives. So that is the link to New Harmony. She attended the original Owenite community and lived in dormitory 2 for 3 years and had her parents as her teacher, and she had been raised by them. But I don't have time to tell more antics. She had a lovely quote about, I'll just give you a summary. So in the dormitory, they had hammocks instead of beds. So you know this story. So she discovered that if she just bumped the gal next to her, it would go boom, 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 and the last one would fall out. So she got into trouble for that. Unfortunate. All right, the two most important people in the Parke sisters' lives are their mother and their father. Nina Owen Parke is the second youngest daughter of David Dale and Caroline Neef, and she's holding their only son. They had 4 daughters and 1 son, Jules, and that is her husband, Charles Parke, and they made a great team because Caroline, her mother, taught her how to sing and play piano. She had an outstanding voice, and you'll learn as we go here that she was learning right along with her children, and she became an exceptional professional coloratura soprano and performed a lot. And so he loved his wife, he loved music. He was not a musician, but he bankrolled it. He paid for all the instruments, he paid for the expensive colleges, and he didn't have money at first, but he became a banker. That's a good way to bankroll. And Doocy, you've discovered something, my sister here in the front row, that he was co-founder of the what is the name of the bank?
The New Harmony Banking Company.
The New Harmony Banking Company. And he was born in Mount Vernon, but he came and worked with the community here, and then eventually founded that in 1890. So very important fellow. And she grew up in New Harmony in the afterglow in 1849, and she was born in the Fauntleroy home. Her father and 5 children, and Jane Owen Fauntleroy and her 4 children, all in one house, and Joseph Neef. And you know how small that house is. These Owens and Neefs, they loved everybody lived together. And just get a bigger house, and we can fit more people, more children. And they did this all their entire lives. And in this living room, it became, of course, the Minerva Society, and so much happened here. Little Nina learned how to play piano over there. She learned how to sing. But most importantly is that Jane Owen Fauntleroy and David Dale Owen started the classic school for young girls. And if any of you know your history about what happened to the New Harmony community, the Owenite community, the women were upset. They were upset about some things. Number one, they were not able to learn a trade other than the feminine arts, the milking of the cow. The weaving, yes, and you could play music, but it was no science, no math. So they changed that with this school, and it was held right here in this little living room. So Nina benefited from the classic school, and she was a very, very bright student. And then David Dale Owen was so successful by 1858, he bought the McClure mansion and inserted Owen into it, wrapped McClure Owen. And he moved his whole family into that home, but he died 2 years later, so he didn't get to really enjoy it. But Nina spent her whole childhood here, and her voice was just developed those high ceilings, if you've ever been in there. She wrote about how her voice would just reverberate all these ceilings in the high mansions. That was where she got her practice. So I love that, because my daughter, my husband, and I all performed when cousin Jane, I call her Jane Owen, I would come here with my family, and we would perform for Kenneth and Jane in that room right there. And there was an etching in the window by Charlie Parke when the Parke Sisters would come and perform in that living room. So I would just get chills being in that space and making music with my own family. There they are, the girls. Nina Dale, cellist, Anna Crawford and her mama. Anna played violin, Nina Owen Parke, piano and voice, Ada Owen, viola and voice, and Caroline Dale, piano. But as I said, Caroline is the only one that was born in New Harmony, and she was born in the laboratory. And interestingly enough, Nina, her mother, inherited the laboratory from her father. And the reason is because when she was a little girl and still even diapered, she would follow her father all around, and would go to the old granary, which was his laboratory at the time, and help him catalog, inventory, put them in the drawers, and put labels on them, and identify, and she'd memorize them. And she was so astute and so curious about everything but she was most curious about the chemistry experiments. And I do have a quote here from her. It's kind of interesting. She was a writer, a wonderful essayist, and I have never seen anything of hers published. I think I might see if I can change that. Let me just find this quote. So when I'm giving you quite a bit of background, but it's important because everything points back to Nina Parke. And the girls came here for years and years, came back and performed on a regular basis. So they were quite known in the community. So when little Caroline was born, she was 22 years old. And she would sing to their daughter in the laboratory and have all of these experiences and memories about her childhood, and was very nervous about being a mother. And I just want to share a few quotes by her in this essay that she wrote. At first, my bosom swelled with pride, but then I experienced something besides joy, the great responsibility, the physical training, the mental culture, and the forming of moral character. All of this I felt answerable for, and yet I was a mere child, myself, only 22 years old. But then, baby Caroline exhibited a strange appreciation of my feelings, showing joy when I sang, but my selection must be joyous. Otherwise, these pieces threw her into inconsolable lamentations. But how easily my voice lifted in this room as I sang. Fond memories of my father added to the acoustical properties. As I sang, my thoughts reverted to childhood. I was standing by my father at his work in open-eyed wonder, watching some mysterious analysis. Perhaps the liquid would change color at his marvelous touch. For hours, I used to stand at his side, lost in amazement, and making my own conclusions. For Father taught me not to be too inquisitive. Years later, I learned from my mother that I was an enigma to him. He expressed surprise that so young a child should show such a degree of interest in scientific experiment. Deciding as soon as my age would permit, he would develop this inquiring nature and make a chemist out of me. This was a dream never to be realized. My father died when I was 11 years old. Instead, my study of science would become the science of motherhood. She took that job really seriously. I mean, she ran a tight ship, but it was all centered in this big house. That laboratory was too small, even though Charlie retrofitted it from science lecture hall, which it was to be. There were drawers for all the scientific discoveries. He didn't get to use it, so it became a home, but it really is quite small, and they wanted a large family, so they bought this shell of a house. No plumbing, no heating, no electricity until the end of the 1800s, and it needed to be filled up. It's too small. So they invited all their relatives too, a la Owen. And so Mama Neve, Grandma Neve came, the grandmother, lived with them here. And then Anna, Nina had a sister named Anna, Nina Owen, the mother. And she came with her husband, so Anna Crawford, her husband, their 2 kids. And then they had 5 kids, Charlie and Nina. There were 7 kids, 4 adults, 5 adults, 12 people, and they had to have someone to help. So they did bring along Nina's nanny, who was, she was not exactly a spring chicken, but so 13 people in the house. This is the house, the Sullivan House. It still exists in Mount Vernon, and we're going to go see it. We just discovered that it still existed.
I recognize that house.
And that addition right there, even though it may be a more modern rendition, I don't know, but so Caroline Dale the pianist, grew up to be an author, and she wrote an autobiography that is just fantastic and tells many stories about the early childhood. And she said that Papa made a schoolhouse, a brick schoolhouse, just in the backyard attached to the house. That sure looks like a brick schoolhouse to me, but I'm not a historian, so Clark, forgive me if I get things wrong. I try to do my best. I am a storyteller, a songwriter, and a journalist, so I try to get as much right as I can. So we'll find out, maybe, a little bit. I can't wait to see it. Okay, so this was the hearth. Okay, this is what kept the family warm. They hardly had any furniture. They had a farm, they had a goat, they had a horse, a cow. They baked their own bread. They, even roasted their own coffee beans and ground them. That was Grandma. She was French. She had to have her coffee. I think that's why my sister and I are so addicted to coffee. We love our coffee in the morning. Anyway, everything happened around this piano. And Charlie, bless his heart, brought it on his horse and buggy from the laboratory to Mount Vernon, which back then was a 2-hour buggy ride. So the piano made it. And Nina taught every single one of her children, as well as the 2 Crawford children, how to play piano. And she took them as far as she could. And then she realized, I need to grow my chops. Back then there were itinerant teachers, and you could, if you had enough students, bring them to your living room, hire them, and feed them, house them. It's kind of like, rent a husband or something like that. One of those things online, HelpX. Anyways, so she and Charlie, they brought a number of very high-class musicians from Cincinnati and Evansville, violinists, pianists, vocalists. So they had this rich upbringing, and they brought all the neighbor kids who were interested. So, believe it or not, there were a lot of musicians from Mount Vernon because of the mother. She made this happen. She just like Robert Owen, spread his enthusiasm for education and for justice and the rights of all people, peaceful living and all that. This was her little gift to the world. And she would, Cara, that's, okay, I'm gonna give, there's a few admissions here. Caroline Neef Owen, the grandma, is Caro, because we have Caroline. Even my sister's Caroline. And Caroline Dale Parke, the pianist, we have 2 Caroline Dales here in the front row, is Cara. Can you handle that? So whenever I say Caro, that's the grandma. Cara is the pianist. I'll try. If it's too much, I'll stop. But everybody's named Dale, so you gotta know that about the family. I did not get it. My brother, my sister, 2 sisters got Dale, but whew. No.
I don't know if anybody else went by the name Dale.
What's that?
I don't think anybody else went by the name Dale.
David Dale did.
Yeah.
He was called Dale. Yeah. Okay, so Nina, as soon as she bedded down all the children at night, she would go to the piano and she would sing. She would sing her heart out and play. And Cara had great memories. As soon as her 5 noisy children were bedded, Mother would go to her piano and sing rare, sweet songs, Handel, Schubert, and Schumann, the very best of these. There is hardly a famous song which does not recall to me a little girl in a darkened room, floating out into the realms of sleep, surrounded by them as if they were part of the atmosphere. They were, quantum physically, they were present. There was music in the air, there was music. She sang to them, but they were in her belly. I did that for my daughter too, and she became a singer. She became a musician. It's pretty powerful. So, Caroline Dale, as I said, she wrote an autobiography, and her voice is just so beautiful. One day, I would like to write a book about the Parke sisters, but using her voice to tell the story because she's so articulate. And that's my next stage here. And she told about her grandmother. She was very close to her grandmother because her grandmother did not believe in fairy tales. No goblins, no fairies, no trolls, sorry. It was all true stories. So she would tell the stories of No Harmony. She would tell stories of her father, Neef, who grew up in Alsace-Lorraine, France, and about the music. The Neef family is where we got the music, I have to say. Joseph Neef and his wife, Louise, in their courting years, they both were trained singers, and the magic flute was just out, and they sang together the magic flute songs. I mean, can you imagine? And she played the piano and brought that over to the States, and bought a piano and taught all of their children. So that really is where the music started. Even though the Owens played, even David Dale played, what was it? Not the flute. It's like a combination of a flute and a recorder. No, small. Clarinet. No, not clarinet. Flat, it's got a word. Flatua, something. Anyway, he was quite good, and he would play with his wife. And whenever the Owen brothers got together with their wives, they played a lot of music, and they told a lot of stories, and they shared their scientific experiments. They had these rich gatherings all the time. So this was continued, and Cara, she absorbed a lot of those stories. And there's a beautiful story about her grandmother who lived with them their entire childhoods. So one night, Caro was checking in on the youngest two children upstairs in the Mount Vernon home. She opens the door and she sees that the two curtains are on fire. And she put those flames out with her bare hands. She just went right on top of them. She didn't even think about it. And there wouldn't be any Parke sisters if it weren't for Caro. And her hands were scarred for life. You know, what a woman. She had a very strong belief. Cara wrote about Caro. And she said that you were educated by your grandmother, your mother, your father, and secondarily by school. So she pitched in. She pitched in a lot. And she was also a good pianist. So whenever Nina wasn't available, the mother had her own quartet in town. The children were now developing an ensemble, 7 children, and they all chose their instruments. Cello, viola, violin, doubled up, of course, there were 2 cellists. Jewel, the boy, played cello, and piano. So she would pitch hit when Mama was gone in town playing with her quartet or performing, and she played dance music for the girls, little French dance songs, and they loved it. They loved her, their grandmas. And they would just have such a good time. And, but she was also a very serious musician. There she is, Caro, very French. Okay, house grew too small. No, they didn't move into that. But what they did is Charlie said, these kids, they're so good. They have exceeded what we can give them here. There's nothing. We still have dirt roads. We don't even have a hospital here, let alone a music college. This is the Cincinnati College of Music. And the 3 oldest children were old enough and good enough to attend the college right away. So what Charlie did is, well, they sold the house and bought another house in Cincinnati. And by then, 1890, he got this, the banking partnership here, and it meant and he also became president of a bank in Mount Vernon. So he could bankroll this big move, but he'd have to stay here. So he stayed 3 weeks in Mount Vernon in a little apartment, and then he'd go up and visit with them for 2 weeks, back and forth, for how many years? 10 years? It was exhausting. So anyway, the three, I just put this in here. It's a terrible picture. But look at the expression on those faces. The joie de vivre is just amazing in these women. All the reading, the stories that I read, their actual words, they just had such a good time. It was a blessed childhood. And Kara said, we didn't have any things. We didn't have toys. We had musical instruments. And we played, it was a musical family, and there was nothing more blessed than be able to all play together. And so I just had to throw that in there. And that's in their house in Cincinnati. Okay, first to graduate was, which one is it? Kara, good job. Okay, so Kara was the firstborn, and I love the idea that she refused a corset when it was time. And her parents, okay, we're Owens, we can be liberal here. So she designed her own dresses. That one on the left is very Grecian, it's very loose, and that was what she would wear every day instead of the buttoned-up Gilded Age corseted look. And then for a more formal concert, she designed this dress over here, the empire waist, but there's still no corset. She never ever had to do that. The others, they kind of conformed. But she was an iconoclast and very serious. You can tell, you look at the glasses. She was a brilliant woman, and she won 2 years in a row the highest honor at the college, gold medal for piano theory and composition. She was just multifaceted, very employable. After she graduated, she actually got all kinds of work. And until the quartet, until everybody graduated and they were mature enough to go out on the road, she worked with lots of different quartets. She performed regularly. She composed. She even wrote lyrics for other people's compositions. She was just an amazing woman. And then she wrote stories and poetry and was published at a very young age. Ada graduated a few years later. Oh, I forgot something really essential. The mother, Nina, graduated with Caroline Dale. She went through the whole program. Amazing. So she was very employable after that. And then Ada was next, and Jules dropped out. He went for 1 year, but okay, this is sexism reversed. Papa said, you cannot be a professional musician. You need to go to a men's college. So he went to Yale. He got an architecture degree. Poor Jules. But there's an interesting story about that. I'll tell you in a little bit. So she got Ada high honors in viola and voice. Afterwards, she went to Paris and studied for a year with a very famous vocalist. And she apparently, okay, I'm sorry you can't hear their music. I never have either. They didn't have vinyl. They didn't record anything back then. It's a shame. So I apologize. I can't turn on a record. These songs, though, that I play, they kind of received it in the background because you were so happy to see each other and enjoying each other's company that I didn't want to keep turning it up and interrupt your conversations. But some of the songs that they played, The Swan was one of the favorites, and my mother played that. My mother was a very excellent musician, and she became a pianist and accompanied her mother with cello. They did performances. Okay. Anna Owen Parke earned a licentiate or a teaching degree certificate from the Cincinnati College of Music. And during college, she kept a record. She had these journals that were very interesting. They were not like Kara's. Kara's autobiography was very story-like, and I have to share with you. So she had 3 journals, which I inherited. Anna's son, when he died, gave me the journals, and I'm very grateful because he knew I was a writer and I was interested in pursuing more on family history and writing about it. So I have these, and the first 2 are while the girls were going to the Cincinnati College of Music, and it just lists things, all the music that they studied, that they learned, the concerts they went to, who the artists were. But Anna was a real flirt, and she kept track of all the handsome musicians, and she'd write about them and fantasize, and they're hilarious. And interesting, Charlie, the father, decided because so many of the girls were still kind of young, Anna and Nina particularly, they had to go to school, to Miss Armstrong's school for young ladies, to get the academics. They made it clear that we got to balance these things. So they were in the private school, and then Charlie hired this guy in the back, this handsome young Spaniard, Jose Ferrar, and Anna had a huge crush on him. I mean, she was 19. He wasn't interested in any of the beautiful young women. You'd think he would be. He was quite decent, but he was a bit of a wild card in his social life. And this gang, it's called The Gang, the journal. And so there is kind of a psychodrama. I don't know all the details, but I'll just share you the 3 sections that she titles. So, a history of the Ferrar gang, beginning with the period of fruition, followed by the short period of decline. Lastly, the downfall or deluge. And it's very intriguing. It is either an essay by itself. I have to write this. It's very funny. And I can't, unfortunately, share too much of that. So Nina's on cello, that's Anna on violin. Down below is Louise Crawford, who grew up with them in the Mount Vernon home, and she became a viola player, although her career was, she became a librarian, and she founded, 4 libraries down in Mississippi. She was really, and the very first, we're talking the 1920s, books on wheels, right? Libraries on wheels, but by horse and buggy, and she'd go out to the outback and deliver books to people in the bayou. She was such a Robert Owen innovator, but she came and studied at the college at one point, and she studied with handsome Jose. Everybody was a bit in love with him, and that was Helen Corbin is in the Cap and Gown. She grew up in Harmony, and she became a concert violinist in Washington, D.C. And that was the year she graduated from the college. And then Nina earned a degree in cello performance. And over on the far right is a wonderful cello that she went to go buy cello strings in a store in Cincinnati. And the owner said, there is an instrument that came in recently that I really think you ought to see. And it's a Testora from Cremola, 150 years old. And I can't do that. It's too precious. And Kara was with her, and here's the account when Nina sat down and put her fingers on this. At once, its the thrilling beauty filled the shop. It seemed as if she did not have to play. The creature played itself, met every touch halfway. It appealed, it trembled, it spoke. And it became her soulmate for 50 years. She took Tess, that was her name. And my grandmother talked about Tess. She painted Tess. She became a painter, but then she got so arthritic she couldn't play anymore. And, well, I'm jumping the gun, but she lost her husband, and she had to take care of her daughter, my mother, and sold Tess to help her get a college education. And it was heartbreaking. But for 50 years, she played this beautiful instrument. And this is one of the concert halls where they played. It's attached to the school, although it was used by the Cincinnati Symphony, as well as students. The students they'd have the recitals in this space. I mean, it was just unbelievably beautiful. I wish it burned down in 1902, but they all did their college recitals. And when they started performing as the Parke Sister Ensemble, they were initiated in this space. I wish I could see it today. It's just so stunning. And Grandma Neef, she would sit in the front row and weep. She was so moved. And Charlie would, boogie up from Mount Vernon. Eventually there was a train, thank goodness. But he was back and forth, and he wanted to be there for every girl's recital. So he would just be thrilled. And then it was time to hit the road. These gals were on demand. They had been playing in Cincinnati for years. They were getting a huge reputation in the community, but they were still, two of them were still too young, and you don't just go off on the train with 4 beautiful women in lace and taffeta. It's dangerous. And in the Gilded Age, it was not allowed. So they had to have a chaperone. And Mary Hahn was a very, very successful violinist and had traveled all over the United States performing. And then there was a vocalist, a man, and I can't find his name anywhere, but I know that he was there. And so they had a tour, and there was somebody who documented the tour with humorous drawings. I recognize Dosey, and tell me if you agree. I think it's Nina who did the pen and ink, and just tell me what you think. But there was a guy, Teddy, that was mentioned in the file. I don't know who Teddy is. He did the cutouts. So I'm going to be quiet, and you just enjoy this little journey. They often had many repairs. They had to find places to fix their instruments on the road, which was not easy. But they enjoyed it. I love this little drawing down here, this little leprechaun. So they grew to be quite popular. Even after this first tour, they were a phenomenon. There weren't women doing this, taking the train from New York to Nebraska in all of these settings. They did opera houses, but they also did coal mines. And the conditions were really hard because, number one, they were not respected. There were lodging that was denied to them because they were theater women, they called them. Now, if you were a respected drummer, one of them said, that would be okay. We reserve our rooms for respected drummers. But you could tell they were dressed to the hilt. They had these gorgeous instruments. They were refined musicians. When they were not allowed lodging, sometimes they had to sleep in the train tunnel, the station. And Kara talked about, we'd have to, sometimes it was cold, and they'd have their instruments in their cases, and they'd be trying to get a little shut-eye because the schedule sometimes was very, very close. At one point when they became super successful, well, that was down a little bit later, 60 nights, 60 towns. That's how they felt when they got home to mama. Feed me, warm my feet. And it was hard. Oh, and I forgot to say about the food. Aunt Kara talked about the victuals in the South, but they never admitted what the victuals were. So it could be anything with a tail and 4 legs. And it was horrible, really horrible food. But they lived, and they were good-spirited, and they really loved what they were doing. And they either had a choice to teach or hit the road, and they chose the tour. Okay, so I'm just going to share some reviews. They just got so popular, they were so in demand, and they had several agents that were booking them all over the place. So, Caroline. It is difficult to do justice to Miss Parke's talents without seeming to overstep the bounds of moderation. For added to a soul filled with love for music and poetic to a degree, she perfectly equipped herself with technique. All is not said, however, until we reckon with the great factor, personality. Therein, Miss Parke need fear no rival. Newspaper in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Miss Ada Parke. Miss Ada sang the difficult aria of Haydn with the Verger Clad. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know if anybody. Verger. This accomplished lady has been in the city for only a few weeks, but during that time, she has made a large personal acquaintance and is the leading star in musical circles. She is receiving undiscerning compliments from all sources. The Post, Huntsville, Alabama. Anna. Those who are fortunate to meet Miss Anna Parke testify to her charm and grace of manner. She is a violinist of very high order, playing always with sympathy and taste, a young violinist of more than ordinary attainments. Norfolk Times, Norfolk, Virginia. Last one, Nina Parke. During her recent visit to this city, delighted everyone who heard her play the cello. And there is only one verdict. She was a genius. Dayton Evening News, Dayton, Ohio. So you can imagine the feeling after all those years of study, and they love the family, they love playing with the family, but they took it to this new level that women just hadn't done. And they were breaking new ground, but it was hard to sustain. It really was a hard life for them. And the next episode of their life was their father died, tragically, of malaria. And all of a sudden they were flat broke. Even though he was a banker, he bankrolled the college, he bankrolled the instruments, but there was no money saved up. There was no Social Security or anything like that. You'd think a banker would have thought of those things, but all they had was the house, and the mother and the grandmother were still there. No, grandmother died. She died in 1894. So they stepped it up. They got 3 agents, and they just boogied from 1900 to 1906. They just boogied across nation. Just coal mines, you name it, schools, and they would teach on the side. And I think this is their last show together. It was in New York, and it just shows. It's like quartets, trios, duos, solos. We'll give music lectures. It's like whatever, we'll teach in the community. They worked so hard those 6 years. And they fed their mother, they put Jules through college. They took care of themselves. They made all their own dresses. They were just remarkable women. And, you don't get gold medals for any of that, but you certainly get a lot of admiration from the next generations. And I have always been inspired by these women, especially and Kara, who we'll learn a little bit more about, becomes an author later on. Okay, so I just want to read this because it was at the back of that program that you just saw. And it's something they believed in, and I believe was really stimulated by Robert Owen, ultimately, and being in his influence. This is by Plato. Music is a moral law. It gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, a charm to sadness, gaiety, and life to everything. It is the essence of order and leads to all that is good, just, and beautiful, of which it is invisible, nevertheless dazzling, passionate, and eternal form. So they decided to go their separate ways and get married. 3 of them got married. It was exhausting to keep up the pace. And even though they had broke such ground during the Gilded Age, it was hard to sustain it on their own. And they didn't have any other recourse, but they also fell in love, 3 of them. And I love Caroline and the Reverend Charles Snedeker. He was like a puppy dog. He was not as scary as he kind of appears to be. He was a wonderful writer. His sermons were very famous. He was the dean of the St. Paul Cathedral in Cincinnati. So for 3 years they lived until 1906, and so Kara could still tour. And then when they moved, he got a job at this St. George's Rectory, and Kara was absolutely bereft. She said, "There's nothing like breaking up a musical family. It's like cutting off an arm." She said, "I was so depressed in her." She said, "I don't think I ever got over it," but she found her voice through writing, and she became a very, very successful author. And Doubleday came to the church, and just so happens that the Reverend said, "Well, my wife has a wonderful book, and you might be interested." They loved it, and they published 12 more of her books. They kept her steadily employed. And she also entertained for World War II soldiers coming and going, and she taught music, and she taught Sunday school. Anna moved to Virginia to become a concert meister they call it, or leader of the violin section of the symphony orchestra of the Norfolk Conservatory of Music. And she was quite the gal, and she met her husband there, Carl Meyer, and they fell in love. And after several years, they moved to San Diego, California. He was an engineer. They had a son, Owen Meyer, whom we've met several times. And but then she died 2 years later at age 35. And it was very sad, very sudden. She had a weak heart, but it's uncertain. Autopsies were not as common back then. They just said, "Oh, it was ureic poisoning." Okay, well, that could be anything. But it was a big blow to the Parke sisters. And poor little Owen was only 2 years old. And he came to live with our grandmother and my mother. They were first cousins, born the same year. And they became very, very close. And he only lived with them for a year, I think. But they were very, very close. And he played the organ. He's a musician. His wife played the organ too. Ada surprised everyone. She attended an Episcopalian training school and joined a religious order in Brooklyn, New York. And she worked for the Magdalene Home, and the place that gets sort of a bad rap for being the home for fallen women. They were women that fell through the cracks. They were poor women. They were divorced. They were left penniless. They got pregnant, and that wasn't acceptable. So Ada served that community for the rest of her life, and she died in 1918 during the flu pandemic. And but up until then, she taught piano, and she had a gorgeous voice. And so she sang with the church, with her order. She was Sister Ada Claire, and she was very beloved. But there are only two Parks standing. You know, mother's gone, grandmother's gone. The mother died in 1911, and so Nina married Dr. Frederick Stillwell in 1909, and Caroline Dale Stillwell was my mother, our mother. She was born. And it really was a love match, as you can tell, the radiant couple. And I wrote a song about them, Frederick and Nina. I have a CD that you can take out of the library if you ever want to hear. And I wrote a story about David Dale Owen called My Dearest Carol that is based on letters that he sent back to Caroline, who was at home raising the kids here in New Harmony. And I used actual words from his journal out surveying. So, at a certain point, life turned sour again. Both Nina and Kara lost their husbands. And first, Kara in 1926, and she came to live with Nina and her husband and Caroline. She formed a very, very close bond with my mother, very close. And they played music, of course. My mother became a pianist, and she often accompanied my grandmother. They would go out. And Nina, she worked in the Cincinnati Symphony and stayed in Cincinnati until her husband died. And Aunt Cara and Nina moved, Nina bought this house. She had a house, dentist husband. Yes, she could sell the house, but otherwise they were broke. And Cara had nothing. She had a reverend who didn't own his house, but she had her books. And she continued to write, and she stayed in Nantucket. And my grandmother, Nina, the cellist, got a job as a house mother at Smith College, and my mother got a full scholarship to attend Smith to study literature, following in Aunt Cara's footsteps. And I've read some of my mother's earlier work. She wrote a book here in the library. It's 9 generations of our Owen family. That's very good research-wise. Letters of 9 generations of our family and the early Owen community is very interesting. But anyway, Cara wrote 2 of her bestsellers up in that little attic in Nantucket. And you see, Robbie's there. Robbie came along. That's Robert Owen's life mask. Now, I always thought it was a death mask. We had that in our hallway. You know, he was part of my childhood. But you can see there's a little smile on his face. So I knew he was here. It must have been hard doing the process of those masks. Okay, these are some of the books Cara wrote. There's 2 Newbery Honor Awards, Downright Densey and The Forgotten Daughter. My sister and I inherited the literary rights to these, and I took over as executive manager. And for 25 years, I've gotten 8 of her books back into publication, and they've been beloved by a whole new generation of readers, and I feel so good that I could do that for her. And we put our children through school with the income from royalties, so it goes round and round and round. And my daughter's a musician, so it all seems to circulate. And Nina became arthritic and sold her cello, and she took up painting in Nantucket. She studied with a fabulous teacher, Stanford Stevens. Oh, no, the watercolorist that, I think it's Stanford Stevens, or Steven Stanford. He was a very famous watercolorist. And I wish I had a really good picture. Dosie has 2 of her paintings that are exquisite. And I wanted to take a picture when I was here, but it has the glass and the original backing, and I couldn't do it. So you have to see, when they were old and they sold the Nantucket house, they moved to Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. And Grams sold to the tourists in Nantucket. She did mostly buildings and seascapes and that sort of thing. And in Bay St. Louis, she did the same thing this was an exhibit. I have that painting, the one on the right. It's beautiful, young child, and the child is not dead, it's sleeping. And this is a book that she had written, a children's book that never got published, but I love the paintings. Nina lost a child. It was stillborn, and it was hard. It was in the Depression, it was the pandemic. Sorry, 1918. And I look at this and I think that's her way of grieving, and that she's holding this little baby in her arms, and there's a windstorm, the ocean, and then imagining if that son had lived. It's orchestrating the world. It's very Little Prince-like, but you can see it's conducting. And she was a lovely person, very quiet. She didn't share. She shared her knowledge. She loved science, astronomy particularly. She gave us one of those star globes, and we'd go out and look at the stars, and she knew every single one of them. And then Kara dies, and Nina's the last one standing. But more relatives came to live in the house, and we have Louise, actually, is the cousin. We call her Wheezy, we knew her. And then there's Deezy behind, who was a sister-in-law of Wheezy.
Clem Penrose's grandmother.
What's that? Oh, that's the one on the far left, isn't it? Yeah. This one is a sister-in-law, maybe it's a different name. I don't know what the name was. But we called them Wheezy, Deezy, and Grams.
And I called it Wheezy, Deezy, and Gaga.
And she's the oldest one, she called it Gaga. Anyway, they didn't want to be buried with their husbands. They wanted to be buried side by side in the Parke Christian cemetery, which I think is pretty special. Kara loved and felt simpatico with the youngest and the oldest, Nina. She loved Nina very much, and they had a musical relationship that was symbiotic. And Kara would describe how she could anticipate what Nina was going to play on the cello, and they were in perfect rhythm, and they were best friends for life. And from very, very small, Kara was the older sister, and I'm going to tell you one little fun story. So when Nina was in diapers and Kara was babysitting her, Nina ran up the stairs to the parents' room, and she stopped in the bed of her parents. Above was a painting of Mother Mary with the Christ child. And Nina pointed and said, "Look, Kara, it's Jesus Dale Christ." That lived on and on, I have to say. So anyway, I think we probably should end here, but I want to show you our youngest, Owen Neef descendant. You probably met him. Clinton Drew Lewis, and the puppy is sitting right over here. Owen Lewis, he is just a doll. And if Cousin Jane Owen could see that expression of him playing in her fountain.
Grandparents.
What's that?
It's the grandparents.
Yeah. I love it. Anyways, he's growing up here. And I'm very interested to see what happens next. His mother, Aunt Claire, is a chemistry professor at USI. And how David Dale Owen is that? And she brings lectures here. And this guy is very smart.
Yes,
What happened? He got a hold of the keys to the golf cart, and it rolled backwards.
no, he turned it on.
He turned it on.
Clanked and hit me. Run over by a golf cart, but that's another story.
Yes. Anyway, the antics continue. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, thank you very much, and I do need to just do the thank yous. I'll be as brief as I can to this fellow over here. I have a fun little metaphor. He's captain of the Boatload of Knowledge Archives. Yes. And Laura Adams is just a profound obit whisperer. And I called them all through the winter, and they were so gracious, so kind. What about this? What about this? And they all had fun. And the Tuesday morning volunteers, are there any here? Uh-huh. I loved how you would get just as excited as I was. The treasure hunt, you know, it's pretty fabulous. And Linda Warren, what's that?
We call them the rabbit holes.
Yeah, the rabbit hole, yes. We know the rabbit hole very well. And then Linda Warren, who can't be here, she was extraordinary, just amazing. This team, wow. And Arlene Feiner, who made it possible for not just me, but so many women to tell women's stories that get buried. There is so much in those archives that has not even been mined. And it's a real pleasure to be able to tell this story, and there's many, many others, I'm sure. And then, of course, everybody here, the staff. Sharon, is she here? She's gone home now. Well, she wrote a wonderful article in the paper. It didn't make me cringe. And that, and believe me, happens quite frequently. They'll get something wrong about something, a performance, a date or something. Anyway. And of course, the granting committee who chose me. They took a chance on me. I'm not a historian, as you can tell. I'm a storyteller, a journalist, and I love history. I've always been told my own stories. And I teach memoir, and I'm just going to put a plug here. I hope all of you are taking advantage of your living relatives and recording your stories and making sure you have them so that you can, at some time, I mean, you can transpose them now. You got Otter AI or whatever. But it's important to pass the river on. And I literally, Dosie and I, thank you, Dosie. This woman housed me. She was my tech and moral support. But we were saved by these stories many times. We lost our parents, our father very young, and our mother. Before I was married, have kids, you had a little bit of her during that time. But we had these stories, and they're essential to the well-being of children these days, where they're getting into a different world. And I don't know how you feel about other realities and living in other drone-ish places, but these stories are essential, I think, to the well-being. And the arts. You got to keep those arts going. Music, writing, poetry, dance, all of them, painting. And archives. Save the archives. Grow the archives. House them, digitize. It's very exciting that this place still exists after all these years, and I'm very grateful. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate your coming out tonight. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming out here tonight. The programs of the Working Men's Institute rolls right along. 2 nights from now, I'm going to see you all right back here at 6:30 as Kelly Reed from Wild Birds Unlimited. She's going to be here for the Friends of the Working Men's Institute lecture series. It's going to be kind of a workshop. She's going to tell us how we can all take better care of the local bird populations. So right here, 6:30 Thursday. One more time for Hope, folks. Thank you for coming out.